Welcome to Diamonds in Dumpster Fires. I'm Melie, and this is the podcast for people who are determined to find a glimmer of hope even while the fires of life are burning around them. Together, we'll dumpster dive through all sorts of topics like divorce, dating, friendships, grief, career ups and downs, and so much more. All with a sense of humor and absolutely no toxic positivity. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Diamonds in Dumpster Fires. This one is called Graceful Goodbyes When Boundaries Are Not Enough. And it sounds really serious, and it is a serious topic, and I'm looking forward to diving into this one with you all. I do want to start by saying that this episode is not an easy one for me. And the reason is because I don't cut people out of my life easily. It's something that I've really struggled with. And to be completely transparent, when I started outlining this episode, I was really, all about it. I was pretty convinced that there was somebody that I needed to remove from my life. But then, as it always happens, I started to feel some doubt. And the reason is because I have a really hard time with goodbyes. But the reality is, sometimes goodbyes have to happen, and if they have to happen, we want to make sure that we do it in a graceful and godly way. So with that in mind, we are going to dive in, and let me tell you, I am learning this process along with everyone else, so I am not approaching this episode as like an expert, but more as somebody who is learning alongside with my listeners, and a lot of times just sharing sort of what I've done wrong, so that maybe you can avoid some of the mistakes that I've made. Now, let me ask you, have you ever made a super hasty decision to just remove someone out of your life? Maybe you just hit that block button and you never looked back. We've all been there, right? Sometimes it's a really quick decision we don't even have to think too much about. Maybe some overzealous telemarketer just won't stop calling. Or maybe there's someone who is sending you super awkward messages on social media or unwanted photos, and you decide, hey, I don't need this in my life. Or if you're like me, you might one day be having a particularly off day when you really shouldn't be on the dating apps, but you go on there anyway, and you block someone because you are 100% convinced he's a catfisher, only to run into him in person 3 days later. Totally not kidding. But sometimes, when we block someone or cut someone out of our life and we don't have any kind of, emotional connection to them, it's just something we do in passing and we don't really think about it too much later. But sometimes it's necessary to cut someone out of your life for your mental, emotional, or spiritual health. And in those instances, it's not funny at all. It can actually be quite serious. It's painful to think about ending a friendship or other connections, and it's hard to figure out how to go about doing that. So while I do acknowledge this is a very serious topic, I am hoping to address it today with some hope, some faith, and maybe even a little bit of humor, probably in the form of my train wreck stories in this department, because I really have not done a good job ending things gracefully when I should have. And as I said, I am not approaching this from a place of know-it-allness or piety. This is a subject that I really struggle with. And in the past, I have made decisions to cut someone out of my life and then regretted the decision. My impulse to rip the Band-Aid off sometimes exposes a much deeper wound. But on the flip side of that, I also recognize that I've kept people in my life who are completely unhealthy for me, only to eventually have them leave when they've gotten everything they can from me. So have you ever been there, where you're feeling used by someone, but you're hanging in there because you think, well, nobody's perfect? I had a coach years ago who said to me that in many cases, she would be all for someone saying nobody's perfect and giving someone grace, because it would mean that they were choosing to forgive someone for something like maybe being late to a meetup or forgetting to call when they said they would. But she told me that in my case, by the time I was saying nobody's perfect in relation to someone, then some pretty egregious things had probably happened. And honestly, that is so true. So please join me today as we dive into the wild world of saying goodbye gracefully, or at least considering it. Let's talk about why you would want to say goodbye to someone. Sometimes it's really hard to sort of recognize the need for distance and why we might want to cut someone out of our lives. One of the reasons is when boundaries aren't enough. So let's talk a little bit more about boundaries. Are you considering cutting someone out of your life because they aren't respecting your boundaries? This is a serious violation if this is happening to you, and I completely understand the need to cut someone out of your life for this reason. And there is something to be said for trying to talk to a person first and maybe express your boundaries if you haven't done that or haven't been clear about it. But let me be super clear. I'm referring to situations where the person in your life is maybe crossing some boundaries that would not be considered abuse. If there is abuse, you absolutely do not owe this person anything, no talking, nothing before cutting them out of your life. But if they are somebody who has been in your life for a while and there is potential that you could maybe address the boundaries issue and you would like to consider keeping them in your life, it might be worth considering addressing. Maybe you haven't even expressed your boundaries to this person yet because you might be afraid that you're asking for too much, or you might be under the misconception that it's not godly to set boundaries in relationships. And if that's you, please know that boundaries are good. They are good for both parties in a relationship. So in her book, Good Boundaries and Goodbyes, Lisa TerKeurst says, boundaries aren't just a good idea, they are a God idea. Meaning God himself created boundaries, so don't feel bad if you need to set some in a relationship, no matter whether that's a friendship, a work relationship, a family member, a neighbor. It is good to have boundaries. Another thing that Lisa TerKeurst says in Good Boundaries and Goodbyes is that we must not confuse the good commands to love and forgive with the bad realities of enabling and covering up things that are not honoring to God. So, if you have tried to set those boundaries and you've realized that for whatever reason this person should not continue to be present in your life, you are not wrong or unchristian to end the relationship. So let me repeat that. You are not wrong or unchristian to end a relationship where your boundaries are being violated. So how do you recognize when someone is disrespecting your boundaries? You might feel the following emotional signs. Maybe when you're dealing with this person, you have constant anxiety, dread, or guilt. Maybe you feel drained after every encounter. You might be going through a pattern of feeling really, really up when you hear from this person, and then they pull away and leave you feeling unsure or uncomfortable with their lack of communication. And I want to add something here for my fellow ADHDers or for those who might have unhealthy relationship patterns and find themselves in this cycle of cutting people out due to feeling rejection sometimes. Let me just say that when you cut someone out of your life while you're in the midst of that feeling, you will probably end up having regret. And that doesn't mean that the decision to cut this person out of your life wasn't a good one, but you can kind of get addicted to this cycle. Let me know if you relate to any of this. You have someone in your life who's very inconsistent with you, doesn't, seem to text back for days or weeks even, and then finally you'll hear from them. And you get a rush from hearing from this person. It can be very easy to confuse that dopamine hit that you've gotten with this attraction or interest for the person. And if you thought they were ghosting you and all of a sudden now they're back in your life, that dopamine hit might be all the fuel you need to keep this unhealthy fire of a friendship burning. And as you're used to with me, I have a personal story. I actually have many personal stories with this, but I'll just share only one. I had one unhealthy friend in my life for several years. I kind of talked about this a little bit in the dating episode before. But he would come in and out of my life for a couple of years. He would block me at times, which really kind of aggravated me, and then he would be back in my life. When we'd start chatting, I'd feel extreme anxiety when he wouldn't write back. I would look at the text, has it been delivered? Did he block me again? Did I say the wrong thing? Should I explain myself more? Am I being breezy enough? Am I too breezy? You get the point. And then, all of a sudden, he would text me, and all that dopamine would rush into my body, and I was relieved. Not unlike how someone addicted to drugs feels when they get a fix. And to be clear, I just want you to know what I'm saying here and what I'm sharing today is my personal experience. I'm not diagnosing anything or anyone. But I do want to say that electric spark you feel, that rush that you get from that person, that could all just be anxiety. That could just be your dysregulated nervous system getting a hit of your favorite addiction. And I know because I became addicted to it. I have multiple times, unfortunately, in addition to having ADHD, I also tend towards an anxious attachment style, which I will do a whole episode on attachment styles. But all of this to say that this person I should have cut out of my life probably a year and 11 months before I did. I knew this person for 2 years. So honestly, like the back and forth, the, disrespect, the treating me like I was just an option, all of this should have been assigned to have a graceful goodbye. But instead, I got trapped in this cycle. And so if you're going through that, give yourself some grace. It's really, really hard to break the cycle, but you can do it. And if it's somebody that you feel you should potentially talk through this with, you absolutely can. Now, I am telling a story about somebody who, honestly, I had been interested in romantically, and he was not interested in me in that way, but dragged me along and pretended to be for a long time. If that's what you're going through, I would highly recommend that you just end that friendship. It can't really be a friendship at that point, especially when there's that disconnect between what the two people want. But if it's a friend and you're finding that, maybe you have a platonic friend that just doesn't text you back, and you start to feel some anxiety over it, and you just express that, hey, when I don't hear back from you for a week or so, I start to feel a little anxious about our friendship. Like, could you maybe let me know if you're going to be busy or you're not going to be able to write back, or maybe just put a reaction on my text message so I know you've read it and it'll be a sign to me that you will come back to that at some point in the future. Or, you can talk about these boundaries with people that you do want to have in your life in some form. But if somebody is disrespecting your boundaries and you realize that this is not a person that you want to continue in relationship with, you absolutely 100% have every right to cut that person out of your life. And like I said before, if we're talking about an abusive situation, that is totally different. If we are talking about, a friendship that just has gone south and you're ready to part ways, you might want to have a conversation with that person about it, explain the reason why, and say goodbye. As you know, this episode is called Graceful Goodbyes, and I'll be super honest, when I outlined this episode about a week before the date I'm recording it, I had tentatively named it Access Denied because I was in a mood and somebody had really disrespected me, in my opinion. And while I didn't end up naming the episode that, it is important that if somebody is disrespecting you or your boundaries or making you feel uncomfortable in any way, you can deny them access to you. My new rule is anybody who treats me like a disposable item from here on out, I am not going to be the giver of a million chances with that person. I realize I am not missing out on anything. So, for all the men since my divorce who have fallen into this category, I am not here for it anymore. So I'm not here to say that these guys are terrible people, but they are terrible for me. So access denied, friendship disconnected. Time in my life is only going to be reserved for those that want to be there. Life's too short to be playing this game of trying to get someone to text you back or trying to get someone to respect your boundaries. And I understand that a lot of boundaries that are disrespected in friendships have nothing to do with texting. This is just my experience. But I've seen other situations where, maybe a friend is completely disrespecting the boundaries of not calling first before dropping in. Now, as somebody who identifies as an ambivert, so that is an extroverted introvert, but I lean more heavily on the introverted scale, and I have ADHD, so my life is chaos half the time. Somebody dropping in on me in the middle of the day unannounced would totally freak me out. That would be just the worst thing I could think of. And if you're going through this and you have asked this person in your life to, hey, please call first or ask permission, text me before you just show up, and that person consistently just disregards your request and shows up at your house, or is constantly asking you for things or whatever the case may be, you have every right to explain your boundary and let them know that they have disrespected it enough to where you would like to take a pause on the friendship. You can even say, for me, listen to me even saying take a pause on the friendship. I hate ending things. I am the worst at ending things. But realize that if somebody is willing to disrespect you, then they are willing to give up on the friendship. because a friendship is a two-way street, right? We both have to respect each other, respect each other's boundaries. And if that is not happening, then you can, and you probably should, at least have a conversation with this person about it, maybe even remove them from your life. So, what does the Bible say about all of this? We can look to the Bible, and now while it doesn't say, yes, cut the person out of your life who doesn't call first, there are some biblical insights that we can gain. First of all, from Proverbs 22, verses 24 to 25, it says, "Don't make friends with an angry man, and don't be a companion of a hot-tempered man, or you will learn his ways and entangle yourself in a snare." So maybe the person that you're dealing with is not necessarily disrespecting your boundaries, but they're just an angry person. They're always hot-tempered. They're, flying off the handle. I've known people like this where you're like out at a coffee shop or a restaurant and they just want to yell at the person behind the counter, and it's so awkward and so uncomfortable, and you don't have to be a friend with that person. Like, the Bible has given you permission here to not be friends with that person. 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, "Do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals." So maybe the person in your life that you're considering ending a friendship with is out doing a lot of crazy things and you don't feel comfortable with it. That's totally fine. Talk to them. If they are a fellow believer especially, try to speak to them about what it is they're up to. But maybe you just don't have the same values and morals, and there's nothing wrong with walking away from that. Look, even Jesus had boundaries. He loved everyone, but he didn't allow everyone into his inner circle. And let me say again, from a faith perspective, cutting ties with someone does not have to mean that you hate them or that you're judging them. Sometimes as Christians, I feel like we can get kind of stuck in this idea of, I can't cut anyone out of my life because I'm supposed to love my neighbor, and maybe my neighbor's driving me crazy. And, as I said before, it's always a good idea to have conversations with people and see if you can restore the relationship. But if you cannot restore the relationship, there is nothing wrong with cutting them out of your life in a kind and graceful way. It's about the stewardship of your heart and your mental health. And I also want to say, I don't hate any of the people who have been on the other side of the toxic relationships that I'm sharing. It takes two people to create a great friendship, and it also takes two people to create a toxic one. So I know that I have my part in it. I'm not, sitting here saying, oh, I was the victim. They're not bad people, but they were bad for me. So it's about stewardship of my own heart and my own mental health, that in the future I'm not going to allow myself to get whipped into these crazy cycles. So, okay, let's say you have made the decision that you do in fact need to cut someone out of your life. You need to end a friendship. How do you do it? How do you know if you've made the right decision? That's all for today. Just kidding. Look, this is hard. This is where I struggle a lot. But first of all, I would say pray. Pray for wisdom and clarity. Take a moment before you do it. And by moment, sometimes that means a day. Sometimes it means a week. Sometimes even longer. This is a very big decision, and it shouldn't be made in the heat of a dopamine drop. Trust me, I have ended friendships in that moment, of like just the dopamine drop, feeling low. Then I've regretted it. And even though sometimes that decision might have been the right one, the regret came from the hasty decision and not really knowing what would have happened if I had just, maybe had a conversation. And had I thought about it more and prayed about it more, maybe I would have done the same thing, but I would have done it way less dramatically. And if you're like me, less drama is very, very good. James 1:5 says, "Now, if any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives to all generously and ungrudgingly, and it will be given to him." So ask God for the wisdom. If you don't know what to do yet, wait until it becomes clear. God will make it clear to you what you should do if you pray, if you wait, and then also seek wise counsel. So wise counsel can come from friends, a pastor, a therapist, a coach. It's always a good idea to run big decisions by someone you trust, someone who can help you see the light at the end of the tunnel. So you can get perspective, and also if you're currently reeling from hurt, confusion, and all the other emotions that swirl around in your nervous system when you're considering a decision like this, you might not be able to clearly see the way forward. But someone outside looking in might be able to offer you a perspective you didn't see before. So, if you've decided that yes, you do need to move forward with a goodbye, how do you communicate that? I would say you should communicate that in most cases. Again, if there's abuse involved, maybe not. But if you do communicate it, try to do it, in a respectful, honest way. This goes back to what I said earlier. Don't do the goodbye yet if your goal in it is to trigger that person to respond with a Hallmark-worthy declaration of needing you in their life. Because if you send a goodbye text to someone, also don't do it by text. That's a horrible way to do it. But if you do happen to send a long goodbye paragraph length text to someone with this motivation of them responding with, oh, wait, I can't lose you, and all you get back from them is, okay, period, that will trigger you more than you can even imagine. Ask me how I know. So let's say you're certain this person does not belong in your life. Should you let them know? A lot of people are going to disagree with me on this, but I really hate blocking. A lot of people are all about blocking. And I'll be honest, I am kind of starting to come around a bit on my view after talking to some people and understanding the reasons why. And I will say that, there are times where I have had to block people because, they've been sending inappropriate things or whatever. So I'm not totally against blocking. But if you say goodbye to someone who was your friend, who was somebody that was, meaningful in your life, do you need to block them? Now, if they are disrespecting your boundaries and coming back into your life after you've asked them to stop, maybe you do. But I am more of the mindset of not blocking people. And I will say, this is just full transparency, as someone who does read romance novels as part of my living, part of my non-blocking habits has probably secretly, and now definitely not so secretly, been that I thought if I left a door open for someone to someday make a big gesture when they realize how great the friendship was or whatever, that then they could, right? But let's be real. If I've gone through the process of deciding this person should not be in my life, them coming back and doing some kind of big gesture would actually be a bad thing, right? Not a good thing. So while I am divided on this, block or don't block, I personally barely ever block people, but I understand why some people do. I would love to know your thoughts on this, so find me on social media, Melie Williams, and let me know, do you block people after you've said goodbye, or do you not? I will say this, no matter what you decide, I firmly believe that unless abuse is happening, ghosting is not the best approach. If someone has been in your life for any good amount of time, I truly believe that a graceful exit is going to feel better in the long run. And going back to that blocking thing, I will say if the only way that you can keep that exit graceful is to remove the temptation to reach out to them in the future by removing your ability to reach out to that person, then hey, you know what? Maybe that is a good case for blocking. But lean on your faith to guide your heart. If you walk away, do it in peace. Don't do the angry paragraph. Don't send a meme. Don't play games. Don't write out a text that says access denied and, whatever, you can't be my friend anymore. Who would do that, right? Who would do that? But just keep it peaceful, kind, to the point. And then if you walk away, really walk away. I have been in situations where I have said goodbye to someone probably 20 times, and they might even currently still be in my life. I don't know by the time this episode airs. But the thing is, if you don't want to walk away from someone, if you're not ready to end a friendship and say goodbye, it's perfectly reasonable to ask for some space, take some time to think through what it is you're feeling, get clarity on your own feelings, ask them for clarity, ask for advice from those you trust. And if you do walk away, give yourself time to grieve. Whether this was a platonic friendship or something worthy of the "it's complicated" status on Facebook, losing a connection with someone who is a big part of your life can be difficult. If you take the time to make the decision when you've prayed, ask for counsel from others, and you know that this is what is best for you and your heart at this time, you will still feel sad. And that's okay. That's human. Grieve the things that you lost while asking for wisdom, peace, and courage to make this tough decision while staying rooted in love. That's all for today. I hope this was helpful. I'd love to hear from you on social media. Have you gone through this? What advice would you give? And I just want to leave you with this one last thought. If you do have to cut ties with someone, it doesn't mean giving up on somebody. It means giving yourself the freedom to heal and grow. Trust God to fill the void and guide both your path and theirs. Until next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Diamonds in Dumpster Fires. Stay tuned for the next episode where we'll dive into more of life's big topics with a sense of humor and without toxic positivity. Please subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and if you could leave a review, that helps the show reach more people and change more lives. Thank you so much.